So we're going to be talking about health and promotion of the infant and family. And this is chapter 9 in your Wong book, okay? So, biological development. In general, infancy is where rapid growth and development happens. They have maturation of all their major systems. So, respiratory, cardiovascular, all their major systems really mature and develop during this infancy period. There is concurrent development of skills, and they grow in spurts. So they'll have nothing for a long time. It's very step-like. So they'll, have nothing and then have a big growth spurt, and then okay and have a big growth spurt, and then kind of plateau and have a growth spurt. So there's no kind of linear progression. It's those spurts. We use growth charts big time in pediatrics. When I show you the pediatric assessment, I will show you an example of a growth chart. And basically what a growth chart says is that a child falls somewhere between the 5th and 95th percentile of all other children. And we do it for height and for weight. And as children are seen all the time, especially as infants. Who has kids in here? Okay, do you remember infancy? You went when they were like a week old, 4 weeks old, 2 months old, 6 months old, 4, 6, 9. You went a ton, and you keep going. And they're monitoring you on that growth chart, or not you, but the child. And they want to see that nice progressive growth. If there's a time where the child kind of falls off, it's an area of concern, a red flag that we need to follow up with. There are some big height and weight changes. And again, these are things you need to know. I know they sound silly, but we need to know normals. Because when we know normals, when a child hasn't met that normal, it is a red flag for us to start investigating why they may not have met that normal. And you guys are expected to know these things that we talk about, not just for us, but growth and development is all over your NCLEX. So it is a large percentage. So height. Infants will double their weight by the time they're 6 months old and triple their weight by the time they're a year. So if they weigh 7, yeah?
Is that someone or computer?
So if a baby is born 7 pounds at birth, what would they be at 6 months? And then at a year, 21, right? So it's pretty simple, straightforward. But for instance, I will talk a little bit more about it later. My daughter was 7 pounds, 4 ounces. And at a year, she was only 16 and a half pounds. So that was pretty significant, right? She was about 4 or 5 pounds lighter than she should have been based on that. It was a red flag for us to follow up. She ended up having celiac disease. So, and that was, we didn't have any other signs and symptoms. She can't talk to us. She can't tell us something's wrong. But we could see that something was going on with her growth and development. So it is something that we monitor. Their head circumference. Basically, you guys don't need to know, but, they have a very pliable head. Remember that the skull is not fully formed when they're born because their brain is still growing. So we need their skull to be able to grow with their brain. So they will have what we call fontanelles. They have an anterior fontanelle, which is right up here on top, the soft spot. It's probably what you've heard people refer to as a soft spot. And then they have a posterior fontanelle in the back. The posterior fontanelle, that back one, closes by 8 weeks. 6 to 8 weeks, that closes. And the anterior one won't close until they're about 12 to 18 months. So not until they're about a year and a half does that close because the brain is still growing and developing. And it is something that we check all the time at Well Child Checks because we want to make sure it's not closing too soon. Because if it closes too soon, then the brain can't grow and the child could end up developing delays or mental retardation or something along those lines. So we monitor that frequently. Basically with height, they gain about 50% of their original height by the time they're 1 year of age. So if they're 20 inches at birth, then they're going to be 30 inches at a year of age. Some biological traits of infants. Oh, I love me a fat, juicy baby. So they have big old heads compared to their body, okay? And that's going to be important, like when we talk about burns. Their tongue is very large, and they have a very short, narrow trachea, which means that they get sick easier. Because if they get exposed to any virus or bacteria, it's a much shorter track to get into their lungs. So that just makes them at higher risk. It's why we tend to be more careful and wash our hands and not expose them to sick people because of their anatomy. They have a large body surface area. So my Tuesday night group, we talked about that with fluid and electrolytes. That's why they lose more fluids. Their cardiac output is dependent on their heart rate. So that's why they have such a high heart rate. They've got nice, squishy, yummy abdomens that don't protect their organs very well. And they tend to be abdominal breathers. So when we see them breathe, we don't look at their chest, because if you try to watch an infant's chest rise, and that's what you count their respirations, you're going to have like a respiration of like 4, okay? You really actually, when you're counting respirations, need to look at the belly for infants. Those are the big ones. Their fine motor development. So fine motor is basically the use of hands and fingers. The first thing is they have the grasping reflex, which is that palmar grasp, and that lasts until they're about 2 to 3 months of age. So if you were to put something in a baby's hand, they're going to grasp at it. All right? It's a reflex. Parents love to think their babies are the smartest, most beautiful thing ever. And I think we're just like blind to it, because I remember like showing everyone like massive pictures of like my son and being like, oh my God, isn't he so cute? And he had like torticollis and baby acne and like cradle cap, and I was like, oh, I look back down, I'm like, oh, he was not that cute. But I think as a mom, you just think like my baby's the cutest, best thing ever. And so parents love these reflexes because they think their baby is so smart and so advanced because they're doing these things. And so don't argue with them, just smile and say, yes, they're just such a smart baby. But a lot of it is reflexes. So the palmar grasp is going to be a reflex until about 2 to 3 months. And then at 5 months, they actually start grabbing at things. The next thing is they start at about 6 months to hold a bottle. Because now, right, they've got a purposeful grasp. They can actually hold their bottle at about 6 months. And then at about 7 months, now that they've got a good grasp and they can hold 2 things, they can start transferring things from one hand to another. And you see how we kind of progress. It's not like we can start transferring things before we learn how to grasp, right? We have to do it in a very step-like order. They can start with their little pincer grasp at around 10 months. By 10 months, they've got that down, which is great because that's when they start to learn to really eat solid foods. So up until about 6 months, they're just primarily breast milk or formula. But once we get to about the 4 to 6 month range, then we're going to start introducing foods, and we want to encourage them to learn to feed themselves, so that pincer grasp comes in handy. Although you would never feed them a full blueberry. Please cut it in half so they don't choke. Then at 11 months, they can start removing objects from a container. And I know this doesn't seem like a big deal, but for a 1-year-old, by 1, they can build 2 blocks, make a little tower with 2 blocks. Sadly, half the time that little tower falls down. But that by 1 year of age, they're starting to do that. Some more reflexes that we see in infancy. Reflexes are really, like I said, really prominent in the infant period. And again, the best way you're going to learn these is just to make yourself flashcards and just study them. Moro reflex is that startled. So if you ever like walked in and said like hi real loud, which is me, said hi, and a baby went, oh, that's that Moro reflex, that startle reflex. It's present at birth, and it's gone by the time they're 6 months old. And again, why we want to know these is because if it persists past the period of normalcy, then we're worried about some kind of neurological defect or something that might be going on. So you're like, that's great, I know that they do this until they're 6 months. But maybe you see a 9-month-old baby and you walk into All Children's and you walk in and you're like, good morning, and the baby does this. You can probably in the back of your mind go, ooh, that's a red flag, something might be off. The Palmer grass we already talked about. That one's the one that disappears about 3 to 4 months. Plantar grass is just the foot. It's the same thing. If you put something onto the foot, like around the sole of the foot, the little toes will kind of flex down on it. And that disappears, and that, it's kind of similar to Babinski. It's opposite of Babinski. So plantar grasp is if you place something at the sole and the little toes kind of flex down to hold it. Babinski, which is abnormal for adults, but completely normal for an infant, is when you stroke the bottom of the foot, the little toes will flare out, all right? In a neuro patient, that's totally abnormal. But in an infant, that's totally normal. For your plantar grasp and Babinski, think about it. If you're when they learn to walk, and we're going to talk about this, at about 12 months. So if they're walking, if every time they put their foot down and they're either flexing the little toes or flaring out, is that going to help them? No. So that's why you can kind of think along those terms too. What is the baby supposed to be doing? Is that reflex normal? No. This one is always funny to me. Parents come in. This is where parents think their baby's the smartest baby in the whole world, because they bring their baby in and they hold their baby up, and the baby does that, right? And then they're like, "Look, my baby's already trying to walk. My baby is so smart." And I'm like, "Yes, your baby is so smart. It's a reflex." But because they think they're the best thing ever. I know I did it as a parent. I'm like, look how smart my baby is. And then lastly is the tonic neck, and that's what we call the little fencing. And basically, the infant will turn their head, and the side that the infant is turning their head, the arm will go out and the leg will extend. So the arm and leg will extend, and the side that the head is not turned, the arm and leg will flex. So I look like I'm fencing, right? Like I'm ready to fight. So, and then it will just switch. So if they turn their head, it, goes. So, and that disappears at about 4 months, but definitely gone by 6 months. Most reflexes are gone by the 6 to 9 month stage because their actions become more purposeful. So that was all fine motor. Now we're going to look at gross motor. Their head control. If you've ever, those who have babies, when you picked up your baby's laying and you pick the baby up, their head just drags, right? They have that little head lag. By 2 months, they've got a little control, and they should have no lag at about 4 months. If you are doing an exam on a baby and they're 6 months and they still don't have head control, that means there's something wrong with the muscles in their neck and that they need to be evaluated. They roll over at around 5 to 6 months. They tend to roll from their belly to their back first. And think about it. They've got their arms to help them, right? So if they're on their belly, I can push myself and use my arms to roll backwards. But if I'm on my back, think of it like a little cockroach trying to flip over, all right? It's a little bit harder. So belly to back first, then back to belly. At about 7 months, they can start sitting, although they look like little weeble wobbles. Have you guys ever seen that, toy? So they stand with, wide legs. Their hands are tripods. They're and then they just sit here and their whole top of the body just wobbles. They're not very steady, but they got it. By 8 months, they sit unsupported. And again, you can see how it progresses along. I can't start sitting unless I can start rolling over because I need those abdominal muscles. I can't start rolling over unless I've got good control of my head to move it with me. So if there's any delay in one of these areas, it's going to affect delay along the whole way. And then by 10 months, they can go from a laying position to a sitting position. Locomotion, movement. It always starts from the head and moves its way down. Cephalocaudal. Again, they start crawling at around 6 to 7 months. And that's typically an army crawl, and they have their bellies on the floor. So they're crawling. Have you ever seen them scoot? They're just kind of crawling and getting across. They creep. That's like the true crawling with their hands and the feet at 9 months. And then they start at about 11 months to walk with assistance. So they'll hold your finger and walk around. And by 12 months, they should walk alone. Now, there's always going to be variations in this, okay? You're going to have kids that meet these milestones really early, and you're going to have kids that meet them a little bit late. And so sometimes it's not that we need to freak out if they don't meet a milestone. We just need to evaluate what's going on. My daughter walked when she was 9 months old. That was awesome. Super smart baby. My son didn't walk until he was 15 months old. Doesn't mean he's not smart. It just means, or that he didn't meet a milestone. But when we looked at our situation, I had a 21-month-old running around at home. So I didn't have time to be like, hold my hand and walk. I was like, let's go, baby. We got to go chase that other baby. So I didn't give him the same opportunities that I had my 9-month-old when there was just one of them at home. So it changed a little bit. And it could have just been his development too, but a combination of that. So it's just, again, we want to know approximately when these things should happen so we can start looking at the situation and say, okay, what do we need to do to help them reach the milestone? All right, I told Tuesday night's group, and so Thursday night, you're going to get familiar with our theorist, all right? Freud is I'm sure you guys remember Freud from psychology. He's a weird dude, all right? But there is some truth, a little bit, I guess, to what he has to say. And Freud always focuses on the psychosexual development of a child, all right? So know what your theorist is focused on, and that's going to help guide you to answer questions, all right? A lot of times when you guys are looking at test questions or trying to figure it out, you will answer the question right, like that this is the right stage for that age child, but you forget to look at the theorist too. So it's not just matching the age to the right, like, development, but also the theorist that came up with it, all right? So Freud is psychosexual, and at infancy, it's all about the oral stage, right? So they experience the world through their mouth, like this baby making out with a puppy. So that's why pacifiers and thumb sucking and bottles are so important at this age. Erikson, on the other hand, is all about the psychosocial. Okay? So our interactions with one another. And we go through stages. And for all of these theorists, they have stages. And we're going to talk about infants, toddlers, preschoolers, school age, adolescents. The theorists don't always match up with the exact ages, but they follow the same kind of path, per se. Because Erikson is going to be birth to one, but his next stage is not quite in the same. You'll see what I'm talking about. And for all the theorists, they say that you have to master one step of development before moving on to the next. And if you don't master that step of development, you won't be able to move on to the next. So with infants, the social development that they have to achieve is trust. All right? They are trust versus mistrust. And basically, when you are, birth to year old, the first social activity that you really have with anyone is being fed. So they learn trust by being fed. Then, again, they're developing. Their fine motor skills are developing. They're learning how to grasp and all of those things. So then we start developing trust in other ways with toys and interaction, social interactions. But the first thing is feeding. And when they develop that sense of trust, we can't make it too easy or too hard. So I know I'm not here to debate or to tell you how you should raise your child, or that the crying method works or that the hugging method works. And to each his own. I'm just here to tell you what's been studied. And basically what Erikson says is that you can't make it too hard for them, because then they get pissed off and they give up, and then they have a sense of mistrust. Or if you make it too easy for them and they never really have to communicate what their needs are, and you're just constantly meeting their needs, then they don't really trust you either, because how do you even know what I want? If you're just throwing stuff at me, you're telling me, you're giving me food, but maybe I wanted my diaper changed. And so now I don't trust you because we're not having that social interaction. So it is a balance between too much and too little. But basically, we don't want them to have too much frustration, because that's what creates the mistrust. Piaget, and here's where you can see Piaget, his first stage is birth to 2 years. So we're only really talking about the infancy stage, 0 to 1, but Piaget spills over a little bit into toddlerhood, and that's okay. But this is his first stage, and Piaget is all about cognitive development, sensor motor. So Freud, sexual, Erikson, social, and Piaget, cognitive. All right, if you can kind of get that into your brain, then you can progress through the steps. So with Piaget, he's focused on development of, the cognitive during this period. And basically, all the stuff that we just talked about is that initially it's reflexes, right? I'm not doing anything in particular. I cry because it's a reflex. I reach out because it's a reflex. Nothing's really purposeful. But as I move on and I develop my primary circular reactions, then my acts become more voluntary. So I grasp on purpose, I'm sucking on purpose, and then they become secondary, where I now can imitate and play. So I can grasp now, I can shake a rattle because I hear a sound, and I know that there's a reaction to that. So at first, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just doing it because it's a reflex. Now I'm doing stuff, but I don't really know what is going to happen when I do it. I just know I can do it. And then I finally get to the point where I'm doing it because I'm looking for that reaction back. And that is that cognitive development along the way. Kids start developing body image in infancy. I know that's crazy to think, but already kids are developing their sense of body. And the big one for infants is object permanence. And basically, this just says that an object still exists even when you can't see or hear it. This is why everybody plays peekaboo with infants, right? Because they're learning that when you are here, you still exist. That when I put the ball underneath the blanket, that ball is still there. And then eventually, when mommy goes out of the room, she still exists, okay? So they're developing that sense of object permanence. And by the first year, they recognize that they're a separate entity than their parent. Social development, it's basically guided by their attachment, their language skills, play. And temperament can influence their social development. We're going to talk a little bit about temperament in a little bit. But the first thing is that they get attached to their parents. So after about 6 months of age, they develop that object permanence. They know they're a distinct individual, but they've developed a sense of trust with that parent. They have that attachment to them. And so they get upset when they are detached from them. You ever seen mom puts baby down and the baby's like, I want mommy, right? So by the time they get to be about 6 to 8 months, then they start developing stranger anxiety. Because not only do they know they're a separate entity from their parent, they know they're a separate entity from you, and I don't know you. So really, separation anxiety is the biggest stressor for kids 6 to 30 months of age. So about 6 months to 2 years of age, that separation is one of their biggest stressors. You'll really see the height of it at around 9 months, and typically by about 12 months to 15 months, it starts to fade, but it can, flank both sides for a little bit longer. And and you have to work through that with parents, because they can't just drop the baby and run, because the baby's going to scream anyways, but they can't just be there, okay, it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay. You can tell that baby 100 times it's going to be okay. But you have to work with the parents on that separation anxiety, because again, you don't want to cause, stress is good. I know none of you think that. You're in nursing school, you're like, no stress. No more stress, I should say. But a small amount of stress is good, because it starts initiating that fight or flight reflexes. But we don't want too much stress for them either, because then it affects them physiologically. So we have to tell parents, this is coming, we're going to do things. Give them objects, like something of the parents, like a blanket that smells like the parent, or something that's going to help them separate during that time. Because what we don't want them to develop is despair and detachment, because they aren't properly separated from their parent. Language. Crying is the first verbal communication. They just cry. And then they start making sounds at about 6 weeks, and they finally start saying mama and dada at 10 months. And darn it, they always say dada first. They tend to say it because dad, dad, dad. If you say it with your tongue and go dad, you can tell ma is harder, because you have to actually kind of purse your lips to do the ma, ma. But dad is just a little bit of the tongue. And so it tends to be a little bit easier for them. And moms will be like, yay! And they're like, dad, dad. And you're like, oh. But now that I'm upset about it. But, and then by the time they're a year of age, they have about 3 to 5 words that have actual meaning. I remember sitting in church with my daughter, and she was about 11 months old, and we did a lot of baby sign with her, sign language. And she looked at us at church and went, more milk, please. And I was like, oh my gosh, she just put words together. She's so smart. And I was like, we can finally communicate. And she's just not going to scream at me. So it is really exciting when they start to develop those words. Now, if they are learning 2 languages, it can be delayed a little bit. And that's okay, because they're processing 2 things. So we're seeing more of that, and I think it's awesome. Right now, speaking to my German student, I wish I knew more than just Guten Morgen. But so if it's a little delayed because they're learning 2 languages, it's okay. Just note that, all right? Play. We're going to talk a lot about play, and people think that play is no big deal, but for all children, infants, toddlers, preschoolers, play is their job. Play is how they learn and grow and develop. And so infants play 2 different ways. They're onlookers. They just watch. If you've ever seen a baby, they're just sitting there watching you, because they're observing their whole world. And when they do play, they tend to be solitary players. They have their rattle that they're shaking. They take their little toy car and just go back and forth. They build their little blocks. They don't play with one another. They don't play with other children. They just kind of watch. Some of the concerns we talked about, we kind of already went over separation, fear. You still, in infancy, still need to set limits and discipline. Although, remember, there's not a lot of cognitive things happening up there, so you're not going to reason with a 1-year-old. It's simple, tends to be like, no, yes, those type of things. With thumb sucking and pacifier use, you're going to hear a lot of debates out there. Thumb suckers there's a chance for their teeth to develop crooked. So we tend to try to limit the thumb sucking, although I never had a thumb sucker. But I've heard from people whose children just like it that it's almost impossible to get them to stop. It's a soothing action. We try to use pacifiers, but then again, we need to make sure that they're not being used much past 6 months, because that's when they start to verbalize, and we don't want them just with the passy all the time in their face. We'll talk about teething in a little bit. The back to sleep is a big issue. They did studies and they found out that SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome, was highly associated with babies who slept on their belly. They don't know why, but it was just highly associated. So there was a big back to sleep movement, and we started putting infants on their back, and the infant mortality rate, dropped hugely, significantly. So we do encourage that. We don't want them on their belly sleeping. And then as far as shoes goes, they don't need shoes. I know they're super cute. Baby shoes are super cute. But if you do want to put them in a shoe, make sure it's soft and flexible, because they're learning and those reflexes are still there, and we don't want to inhibit anything. Nutrition and feeding. I love that picture. So nutrition is the biggest thing that influences growth and development. If they are not being fed well, they are not going to grow well. And if they don't have the nutrition they need for all their body systems and organs and brain development, they're not going to grow physically or mentally, okay? So it's one of the biggest factors. We say breast milk for at least the first 6 months, although most people encourage it for at least a year. If they're not being breastfed, then we use iron fortified formula. All right, there's tons of different brands out there. It doesn't really matter. They're all essentially the same. We start to add iron at 4 to 6 months. And that's because basically when a baby is born, they have all the mom's antibodies and iron kind of stored up in them. And so they're like nice and nourished. And then they start to lose those resources the longer they're outside the mom's belly. So we start to add some supplements at that time. So we'll do iron. Iron is gross. It is, if anyone's ever given their child iron, it's like a greenish black in color, and it will change their child's stools, and it can stain their teeth. And at about 4 to 6 months is when they're starting to develop teeth. So you want to make sure that when you give iron, you put that plunger in the back of their mouth, and that you can blow in a child's face, and it startles them, and they'll actually, they can't take a breath when you blow in their face, and it makes them swallow. So it's a nice way to get someone to take their medicine without like shoving it down their throat. And then typically we tell the parents not to add it to their formula or to breast milk, because iron binds to calcium and will just get excreted. So they need to make sure that they do it in between feedings, not with feedings, and that anything with vitamin C will help absorb it. So give a fruit at that time. We don't really recommend juice, but something with vitamin C will help absorb it, but definitely don't give it with a meal. Then we start introducing solid foods after 4 to 6 months. And it's exciting to feed a baby, but you're not gonna like sit down and give them carrots and green beans and strawberries and oranges all at the same time. Because the second you give them carrots and green beans and strawberries and oranges, they're going to break out in a rash, and you're going to be like, I don't know what it was from. I just gave them all at the same time. So you've got to introduce things one at a time. So you give oranges, and then 4 days later, you give strawberries, and 4 days later, you give carrots. And in fact, you would actually give veggies first. Don't give fruits first, because then they're never going to eat that veggie. Because the fruits are yummy and sweet, and they're like candy and ice cream to babies. So we always start off with veggies first and then introduce fruits. We don't do whole milk until a year of age. So it doesn't matter if they're breastfed or formula fed. no whole milk until at least 1 year of age. And that's because there's a protein in milk that babies can't digest. So it causes GI bleeds for them, and it could drop their hemoglobin and make them sick. So definitely no milk. Some kids are easily weaned off breast milk and formula. Some take some time weaning off, meaning you might have to do a little mixture. My daughter wanted nothing to do with whole milk, nothing at all. We found out later because she has celiac and it irritated her, so that was probably a good reason. But she wanted nothing to do with it, so we had to, we would take 3/4 breast milk and 1/4 milk, and we did that for weeks, and then we did half and half for weeks, and then we gradually weaned her off. My son went from breast milk to whole milk and no problem. So every kid's going to be different, and it's okay to kind of move them along the continuum to wean them off. All right, some things to think about when you're feeding a kid is if they are formula feeding, don't ever warm the formula in a microwave. It warms unevenly, so you can have spots that are cold and spots that are burning hot. If you've ever microwaved something and you're like, oh, you take a bite and half of it's ice cold and the other half super hot, that's exactly the same concept. So that's what happens with the milk. So they have to, basically you'll see a lot of people just use, they don't really recommend tap water either because of lead, although I don't think we have that problem as much anymore. But they'll use lukewarm water to make, the formula, or if it's cold, then they need to heat up a cup of water and then put the bottle into the water to warm up that way. We don't ever prop bottles. I see this and it makes me want to cringe. They'll lay a baby down, and because the baby can hold, even I've seen it at 2 months old, when they can't hold yet, they just prop they'll put pillows underneath and just prop the bottle. One, they can choke on it, aspirate. Two, it can rot their teeth out because it's just sitting there on the teeth. And three, it doesn't promote that whole trust versus mistrust, that whole bonding experience. Nursing my children was one of the best things I ever did. I can remember just sitting there, and it was my special time with them, and I would sit there for the 15 minutes and feed them and hold them and talk to them. My husband thought I was gross because I was always afraid to clip their nails, even though I'm a trauma nurse. So I would bite their nails while I fed them. So, a little weird. No judgment zone here, okay? So it's a great bonding period, and so we don't want parents to just prop a bottle in them and walk away. We want them to. That's part of that whole development is spending time with them, feeding them. So, sleep and activity. I think we've already kind of talked about this. I got ahead of myself. The Back to Sleep campaign. We encourage bedtime rituals. Kids do so much better if they have a ritual and you start it in infancy. I know it seems crazy, but sleep is super important to me. I do not like being woken up in the middle of the night. So I was very thankful. We had a very strict bedtime routine, and my kids always, knock on wood, did great with that. Even if it's just, bless you, I read a story and we have our bottle and then we get put to bed and we sing a song. It's, we do it the same way every time. And kids do great. They like the rituals. They know that it's bedtime. They know this is my rest period. It does get a little tricky when they're in the hospital because we can't always give them the same bedtime rituals, which makes it hard for them to have sleep. So if you're adult children and you're working with families, one of the things you can ask them is, what do you do with your child if you put them in bed at night? What makes them feel comfortable? Because that's important. Sleeping arrangements, family bed. Again, I'm not here to judge or tell you right or wrong, but it is not recommended for any child to sleep in bed, all right? If you choose to have a family bed, they really want you to have a bath set or a crib next to your bed. It happens. It's never on purpose, but you feel horrible that you go to sleep with your baby and then you roll over and you suffocate your baby. because you roll over onto them. I've seen it multiple times. It just happened to friends of ours, and it's horrible. You know, so we really don't recommend a true family bed in which the infant is sleeping in the bed with the parents. Dental health. Basically, you start cleaning their teeth as soon as they get them. And really, even before, you want to start cleaning the gums. It becomes part of the ritual, just like a bedtime ritual. They start developing teeth about 4 to 6 months of age. And basically, they'll have the number of teeth that the number of months they are. So if they're 6 months, they'll have about 6 teeth, 7 months, 7. But again, that can vary greatly. My daughter had 4 teeth by the time she was 4 months, and my son had a lot of teeth. My nephews didn't get their first tooth until they were a year old. So tooth eruption can vary widely for a child, but basically you still want to encourage dental care. Now, I mean, granted, it's so cute. If you're a parent or if you've seen them, they have like these little rubber toothbrushes that you put on your finger, and you're like, doot, doot, right? And that's considered brushing the teeth. But you want to go ahead and get in that habit with the child, because kids really like rituals, they really like habits, and if you start them early, they will, keep with them. Injury prevention. So in every lecture, we're going to talk about anticipatory guidance. And anticipatory guidance is huge. It's another huge element of growth and development, because we need to prepare parents for what is coming. A lot of why we know, like, we're going to learn about this growth and development is because I can say, I know a baby's going to walk at 12 months, so I know that I need to tell a parent, get ready to child-proof your home, because your baby's going to be mobile and they're going to get into stuff. So we talk a lot about anticipatory guidance because we want to prevent injuries. Suffocation, we avoid things like plastic balloons, small items, because again, what did Freud say? This is the oral stage. So where is everything going? In their mouth. I've had babies choke on button batteries, a bunch of random stuff. So if they can get a hold of it, it is going in their mouth. So you have to be really careful. And it's easy to forget. I mean, I have 2 kids. I've been through it. They're still alive. I didn't, I haven't sent them to therapy yet. So I was super vigilant about it. And I was taking care of my little niece who's a year old, and I wasn't paying attention, and she starts choking, and I'm like, oh my God, what's going on? And I hit her back, and out pops her little hair tie that she had ripped out, shoved in her mouth. And I was like, oh my God, my sister's going to kill me. And like, I'm a pediatric nurse practitioner. I should be competent, but it happens. So just, anything and everything will go in their mouth. So you have to be very careful. Motor vehicles, they need to be in a 5-point harness. And I hate this picture because this is the wrong way to do it. Okay? Where should this be? Way up higher. Okay? What did I say about their soft, squishy bellies? Right? It doesn't protect their organs at all. So if you have that, this is a 5-point harness because it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the clip in the middle of the 5. So if you have this plastic piece across their belly and they get in an accident, that's just going to shove into their belly, and they're going to have a spleen rupture, their kidneys are going to get damaged, they're going to have liver damage. That does them no good. The strongest part for them is their ribs. So this has to be up here across their rib cage, all right? And so parents will think they're doing great because they put them in here, but if they don't move this to the right position, they're helping them some. The other thing is, I see parents put the kids in the seat all the time, but I don't see them buckle the seat to the car. We kind of laugh and think it's funny, but we see it a lot. And I took care of a near drowned because the parents got into an accident and they rolled, so the parents were trapped in the car, and the infant was in their car seat, but the car seat got ejected from the car upside down into a puddle of water, just a normal puddle of water, and the baby drowned because they couldn't push themselves. They don't have the strength, and the baby drowned in a puddle of water. All right, so we really need to make sure that they understand not just how to put the car seat on the baby, but to how to put the car seat in the car. All right. We don't leave unattended, on high. These are like death traps. Many of you may have had these when you were little, but they are death traps. The ones with the wheels. Now, we see them all the time. They're saucers, and we see them, and as long as they're stationary, they're not the best toy, but they're fine. But the ones that are mobile, it makes them mobile before they're ready. The reason we have progression is because the child is ready to meet that milestone and can handle the quote-unquote consequences of it. You stick a 6-month-old in here who's not ready to walk, it makes them mobile before they're ready to be mobile. And then they do things like, especially 2-story houses, I've seen kids that have wheeled themselves down a flight of stairs because it made them mobile before they could. So, and again, accidents happen. I wouldn't even say these are bad parents, to be honest with you. These are probably good parents. But you just don't think about it sometimes. You have to be careful about surfaces. Remember, they're starting to roll over by 5 or 6 months. So telling parents, never leave a child unattended. Myself, I think I'm a pretty good parent. But have I screwed up? 100%. My daughter, she was a year old. We were literally getting her dressed to take her to her 1-year-old well child check. And I was changing her on the changing table. And I don't remember, my attention got called away. And so I hovered my hand above her, but I wasn't touching her. I did the old and I turned and she rolled right over the table. And that 1 second that I turned my head, she rolled over, and instead of going to her well child check, we went and got a skull x-ray because she fell. So it happens. Accidents happen. Our job is to try to prevent them as much as possible, and just to keep reiterating. So it may seem stupid and silly and like, oh, duh, of course. But when you're tired and sleep deprived and you've got 17 other things going on, plus maybe you just lost your job, or your husband's been deployed, or your significant other is sick, it's hard for them, okay? And so it's our job not to really judge them or to put them down, but to really just give them the resources they need to protect their children as much as possible. We kind of talked about a lot of this. Remember, we really want to give them education related to their growth and development, related to nutrition, and basically about appropriate parenting practices. Again, it is not our job to judge or tell someone how to parent, but it is our job to say, if they say we co-sleep, say, what's recommended is that you put the baby in a bassinet next to you, all right? We can't force them. We can't say, well, you're going to kill your baby. No. All we can do is say, what's recommended is that you put him in a bassinet next to him. And I think that's pretty much it for infants.